November 17, 1944. 1340 hours. The eastern approaches to Mandalay, Burma. The humid, monsoon-laden air of the Burmese jungle clung heavily to the landscape, a palpable tension settling over the muddy tracks that served as roads. With the grinding of gears and the deep-throated rumble of its diesel engine, a Japanese Type 3 Chi-Nu, the newest and most formidable medium tank in the Imperial Japanese Army's arsenal, advanced with methodical confidence. Its commander, Lieutenant Teishin Yamamoto, was a seasoned and studious officer. He had pored over intelligence reports and after-action reviews, developing a profound understanding of the American M4 Sherman and its 75mm main gun. His calculations were precise and, he believed, irrefutable. At a standoff range of 800 yards, the sloped frontal armor of his Chi-Nu could confidently withstand a direct hit from the Sherman's standard weapon. This knowledge bred a certain tactical arrogance, a belief in the battlefield equation that now favored Japan. What Lieutenant Yamamoto could not possibly have accounted for, however, was the identity of the armored vehicle maneuvering into a concealed firing position approximately 900 yards to his left. It was not a standard Sherman. The long, menacing barrel that protruded from its turret belonged not to an American 75mm gun, but to the British Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder, one of the most devastating anti-tank weapons of the entire war. This specific variant of the Sherman, known as the Firefly, had been engineered for a single, brutal purpose: to kill heavy German armor on the battlefields of Europe. Its unexpected arrival in the jungles of Burma was about to shatter the established paradigm of Pacific tank warfare. At 1341 hours, the theoretical safety of the Chi-Nu's armor was violently disproven. The Firefly's gunner, having acquired a perfect sight picture, squeezed the trigger. The resulting roar was not merely a gunshot, it was a concussive blast that shook the very ground. The armor-piercing round, a 17-pound solid shot of hardened steel, covered the distance to its target in a fraction of a second, striking the Chi-Nu's hull with the force of a primordial hammer. The tank's 50mm of frontal plate offered as much resistance as tissue paper. The projectile did not simply pierce the armor, it obliterated it. Inside the confined space of the Japanese tank, the physical laws of combat became apocalyptic. The kinetic energy of the penetrating round transformed into a storm of superheated metal shards, spalling, that ricocheted around the fighting compartment at supersonic speeds. The air itself compressed into a lethal shockwave, rupturing internal organs. The crew, including Lieutenant Yamamoto, had perhaps 0.003 of a second of awareness before their world ended. Secondary explosions, as the tank's own ammunition and fuel stores ignited, finished the grim work, tearing the turret from its ring and hurling it into the air. The carefully crafted Japanese tank doctrine, refined through 3 years of brutal Pacific combat, was rendered completely obsolete in the 1.2 seconds it took for the 17-pounder's round to complete its terminal journey. The genesis of a crisis, a shifting balance of power. The deployment of the Sherman Firefly to the Pacific was a direct and urgent response to an alarming shift in the tactical landscape. For most of the war, Allied tank crews in the Pacific had enjoyed a comfortable technological superiority. Japanese tanks, such as the lightweight Type 95 Heigo, were notoriously undergunned and thinly armored, often being destroyed by infantry bazookas or Sherman 75mm fire at virtually any engagement range. This changed dramatically in late 1944 with the battlefield introduction of the Type 3 Chi-Nu. The Chi-Nu represented a quantum leap in Japanese tank design. Its main armament was the Type 3 75mm gun, a weapon derived from a respected field gun, capable of penetrating roughly 75mm of armor at 1,000 meters. More critically for Allied planners, its own frontal armor, 50mm thick and intelligently sloped, was theoretically immune to the standard 75mm gun of the M4 Sherman at combat ranges exceeding 500 yards. For the first time since the early days of Guadalcanal, American and British tank crews were facing an opponent that could not be defeated through brute force alone. It required tactical finesse and luck, commodities often in short supply on the battlefield. Allied casualty reports from the Burma front in October 1944 painted a stark picture. Losses in armored units had surged by over a third compared to previous months. The 3rd Carabiniers, a British regiment equipped with Shermans, suffered the catastrophic loss of 3 tanks in a single engagement near Mogong on October 23rd. Post-battle analysis confirmed a chilling reality. All 3 Shermans had been destroyed by high-velocity 75mm rounds fired from distances beyond 600 yards, ranges where their own return fire proved utterly ineffective against the Chinoo's robust frontal protection. A palpable sense of vulnerability began to spread through Allied armored formations. The arrival of the Jungle Dragon. The Firefly's anatomy. The solution to this crisis arrived discreetly at the port facilities in Kolkata on November 3, 1944. A shipment of 12 Sherman Firefly tanks, officially designated as the Sherman IC or VC based on their hull type, had been urgently diverted from reserves earmarked for the European theater. To the untrained eye, they were merely Shermans with an unusually long gun barrel. To a trained tanker, they were a revelation. The heart of the Firefly was the British 17-pounder anti-tank gun. A masterpiece of ballistic engineering, it fired a 17-pound, 7.7 ki, armor-piercing, capped, ballistic-capped, APCBC, round at a blistering muzzle velocity of 2,950 feet per second. Royal Ordnance Factory technical data sheets revealed its terrifying potential. At a standoff range of 1,000 yards, it could punch through 140 meters of homogeneous steel armor. The Chinoo's maximum armor protection of 50 meters was, by comparison, pathetically inadequate. The mathematical reality was as brutal as it was simple. The Firefly could engage and destroy any Japanese tank from distances where it remained virtually invulnerable to return fire. Mounting this colossal weapon into the Sherman's turret had been an engineering challenge of the highest order. The gun's recoil was so tremendous that it required a completely redesigned recoil system and a heavily modified turret layout. To accommodate the massive breech and longer rounds, the crew was reduced from 5 to 4. The loader's position was eliminated and his duties were assumed by the tank commander. Ammunition stowage was also sacrificed, dropping from 97 rounds in a standard Sherman to just 77 in the Firefly. Yet each one of those 77 rounds carried exponentially more destructive potential than anything previously seen in the Pacific Theater. These revolutionary tanks were assigned to the 7th Light Cavalry, an experienced Indian Army armored regiment that had been fighting a grueling campaign in Burma since early 1944. The regiment's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Whitfield, a veteran of the North African campaign, immediately grasped the Firefly's significance. It was not merely a better tank, it represented a fundamental shift in tactical philosophy. For 3 years, Allied armor had relied on numerical superiority, infantry support, and maneuver to overcome Japanese positions. The Firefly offered something entirely new, the capability for absolute dominance, the power to destroy the enemy before he could even effectively engage. Baptism by fire. The doctrine of standoff annihilation training commenced with intense urgency at remote training grounds. The crews, a mix of British veterans and seasoned Indian soldiers, quickly learned the Firefly's unique characteristics. Firing the 17-pounder was a visceral experience. The entire tank would rock violently backward on its suspension with each shot. The muzzle blast was colossal, kicking up a huge, unmistakable dust cloud that instantly betrayed the Firefly's position. Furthermore, the long, overhanging barrel made navigating dense jungle trails a treacherous undertaking. Live fire exercises against captured Japanese tanks, including a Type 97 Chi-Ha and a precious Type 3 Chinoo, yielded results that surpassed even the most optimistic expectations. At 200 yards, a distance considered safe by Japanese tankers, The Firefly's AP rounds sliced cleanly through the Chinoo's frontal plate, as if it were butter, often exiting through the rear armor and continuing their flight into the jungle beyond. The damage inside was described as catastrophic. Gunnery Sergeant William Davies, a North African veteran overseeing the training, noted in his report, "The 17-pounder doesn't just penetrate, it obliterates. The spalling effect alone would guarantee a crew kill, even if the shot itself passed through without detonating ammunition." Japanese tanks are not engineered to withstand this level of kinetic energy transfer. The psychological impact on Japanese tank doctrine would prove as decisive as the physical destruction. Since 1942, Japanese armored tactics had been built upon a foundation of aggressive closing and ambush, predicated on the understanding that while American tanks were more numerous, they were not insurmountably superior in a direct duel. The Firefly invalidated every single tenet of this doctrine. Allied signals intelligence, having broken Japanese military codes, intercepted increasingly frantic reports. A message from the 14th Tank Regiment on November 8th read, "Enemy has deployed new tank variant with extended gun barrel. Engagement range appears to exceed our capability to respond effectively. Request technical assessment and tactical guidance." No effective guidance would ever arrive. The ambush on the Yaoyan Road, a tactical masterpiece. The Firefly's combat debut came sooner than planned. On November 15th, Japanese forces launched a counterattack near Shibo, supported by a company of the new Chinoo tanks. Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield made the bold decision to commit his still-in-training Fireflies. 4 Sherman Fireflies were carefully positioned in hull-down ambush positions along the anticipated Japanese axis of advance, the Yaoyan Road. Their long barrels were camouflaged with foliage. Several hundred yards behind them, standard M4 Shermans were deployed in a conventional defensive line, a deliberate ruse to convince the Japanese that they were facing a typical Allied armored formation. The battle commenced on the morning of November 17th. After a brief but intense artillery barrage, 6 Type 3 Chinoo tanks, their commanders confident, advanced down the central road. At 13:46 hours, the gunner of Firefly, Lancer II, Havildar Singh from Punjab, acquired the lead Chinoo in his telescopic sight. The range was 920 yards. He took a final breath, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The resulting cataclysm was both instantaneous and horrifying. The 17-pounder round struck the Chinoo's turret ring. The penetration was clean, but the aftermath was not. The shot's immense kinetic energy liquefied inside the tank, creating a whirlwind of white-hot steel fragments. The ammunition stowage detonated moments later, blasting the turret completely off the hull and throwing it a dozen feet into the air. The remaining Chinoo commanders were paralyzed by a combination of shock and tactical disbelief. Lieutenant Yamamoto, in the second tank, made the instinctive and, under normal circumstances, correct decision. He ordered his driver to charge forward, to close the range gap where his own 75mm gun could become effective. It was a fatal miscalculation. At 870 yards, another Firefly, Lancer IV, engaged. Its shot pierced the Chinoo's sloped frontal glacis plate, tore through the driver's compartment, and detonated the fuel tanks. The tank was instantly consumed in a fireball. The Japanese formation disintegrated into chaos. Some tanks attempted to reverse. Others sought cover. One initiated a desperate suicide charge. It was all for naught. The Fireflies, operating with cold, methodical precision, systematically destroyed the remaining Chinos. The entire engagement was over in less than 8 minutes. 6 of the Imperial Japanese Army's most advanced tanks were reduced to smoldering wrecks. Not a single Allied vehicle was damaged. The supporting Japanese infantry, witnessing the utter annihilation of their armored spearhead, broke off their attack without ever making contact with Allied lines. The aftermath and the end of Japanese armored ambition. The aftermath of the engagement on the Yaoyan Road sent shockwaves through the Japanese high command. the after-action report from the 7th Light Cavalry was unequivocal. The Sherman Firefly had established a zone of absolute dominance between 600 and 1,200 yards, where Japanese armor was effectively helpless. In the following weeks and months, the psychological impact of the Firefly corroded the morale of Japanese tank crews. The fundamental contract of armored warfare, mutual risk, had been broken. They were no longer combatants, they were targets. Japanese armor doctrine was forced into a complete reversal. Aggressive mobile warfare was abandoned in favor of a desperate static defense. Surviving Chinus and other tanks were dug into the ground as immobile pillboxes, a tacit admission that mobile armored operations were no longer viable. Allied operations, such as the drive on Mandalay, Operation Extended Capital, now incorporated Fireflies as Overwatch Guardians. Their mere presence dictated Japanese tactics. Intercepted orders from Japanese regiments explicitly forbade engagements with Allied armor beyond 400 meters and emphasized the use of night attacks and terrain masking, tactics of the weak against the strong. The statistical evidence of the Firefly's dominance is staggering. Between November 1944 and the end of the Burma campaign, the handful of Fireflies deployed, never more than 16 at any one time, were credited with the destruction of over 70 Japanese tanks. The kill-to-loss ratio was astronomically in the Firefly's favor. Not a single one was ever destroyed in tank-versus-tank combat. Those that were lost fell victim to mines, artillery, or, in one rare instance, a heroic infantry suicide attack. A legacy forged in steel and fire. The legacy of the Sherman Firefly in the Pacific Theater extends far beyond its impressive kill count. It stands as a powerful testament to the dictum that in modern industrial warfare, technological superiority, when applied correctly, can be utterly decisive. It demonstrated that courage, training, and tactical guile, however formidable, cannot overcome an insurmountable physical disadvantage. The Firefly's success cemented a principle that would guide post-war tank development for decades. The primary purpose of a tank is to carry the most powerful gun possible. This philosophy is evident in the design of the British Centurion, the American Patton series, and the Soviet T-54 Shu-55. The era of the balanced medium tank was, in many ways, brought to a close by the long, lethal barrel of the 17-pounder in the jungles of Burma. For the crews who manned them, the Firefly was a vessel of immense power and a guarantor of survival. For the Japanese tankers who faced them, it was an inescapable specter of death, a weapon that rewrote the rules of engagement from a distance they could not challenge. The rusted hulks of Type 3 Chinus that still dot the Burmese landscape are silent monuments to a day in November 1944 when the calculus of war changed irrevocably, and a single shot from a British gun heralded the end of Japanese armored ambition in Asia. The dominance of the Sherman Firefly exposed a fundamental and unbridgeable chasm between the industrial military complexes of the Allies and Japan. While Allied intelligence initially feared a rapid Japanese countermeasure, none ever materialized. The reason was rooted in the very nature of Japan's war economy and strategic priorities. By late 1944, Imperial Japan was in a state of catastrophic industrial collapse. The Allied submarine campaign and strategic bombing had strangled the flow of raw materials and crippled manufacturing centers. The Japanese military-industrial complex was forced into a policy of triage. Priority was given to the production of aircraft for kamikaze missions and warships in a desperate attempt to stave off invasion. Armored vehicle production, always a lower priority for an army focused on infantry and naval power, was relegated to the bottom of the list. The Type 3 Chi-Nu itself, of which only about 150 were built, represented the absolute pinnacle of what Japanese industry could achieve under duress. To develop a new tank capable of countering the Firefly would have required a multi-year project, designing a new, larger turret and chassis to accommodate a more powerful gun, developing that new gun itself, which would have to be in the 88 mm or 90 mm class to be effective, and then retooling factories for its production. This was a logistical impossibility. Japanese engineers were well aware of the 17-pounder's capabilities and understood that their current tank designs were generations behind. They had conceptual drawings for more advanced tanks, like the Type 4 Chaito with a 75mm high-velocity gun, but these never progressed beyond a handful of prototypes. The war ended before they could see combat. Consequently, Japanese tactical adaptations were not based on technological parity, but on desperation. The order to dig tanks into the ground as static pillboxes was an admission of defeat. It sacrificed the tank's core attributes, mobility and shock action, in a futile attempt to enhance its survivability. Yet even this failed. As the engagement near Minbu demonstrated, a Firefly could still destroy a dug-in Chinu by targeting its exposed turret from over a mile away. The Japanese army was forced to confront the grim reality that there was no tactical solution to a strategic and industrial problem. The human dimension. Crews on both sides of the site. The Firefly's impact transcended metal and statistics, deeply affecting the men who crewed them and those who faced them. For Allied Firefly crews, the overwhelming power of their weapon bred a unique form of combat psychology. While they were assigned the most dangerous missions, often acting as the spearhead or the rear guard, they also operated with a profound sense of confidence. Veterans' diaries and post-war interviews frequently mention a feeling of controlled lethality. They knew that in a long-range duel, they held all the cards. This reduced the ambient stress of armored combat, replacing the fear of a sudden, lethal hit from an unseen enemy with the focused pressure of perfect marksmanship. Their primary anxiety shifted from survival to performance. A missed shot was a greater failure than a near miss from the enemy. However, this advantage came with its own burdens. The Firefly was a high-maintenance beast. The tremendous recoil and muzzle blast put immense strain on the tank's chassis and optics. Crews became adept at field repairs and developed a keen ear for any mechanical irregularity. The reduced ammunition capacity meant every round was precious, demanding disciplined fire discipline unheard of in standard Sherman units. The loader commander had to work in a cramped, hectic turret, managing the massive 17-pounder rounds while simultaneously commanding the tank and directing the driver. For the Japanese tank crews, the experience was one of escalating dread and helplessness. The initial confusion reported in November 1944 soon curdled into a deep-seated fatalism. A captured diary from a Chinu driver in the 14th Tank Regiment, dated January 1945, reads, "We are no longer samurai in steel chariots. We are turtles in a tin can, waiting for the hammer to fall. They see us from so far away, a distance we cannot even see clearly. We hear the whistle of death before we even see the enemy tank." This sense of being hunted by an invisible, unstoppable force was devastating to morale. Instances of crews abandoning perfectly functional tanks before battle, choosing to fight as infantry, became increasingly common, a stark indicator of a broken will to fight in their designated role. Strategic ripples, influencing the invasion of Japan. The performance of the Firefly in Burma did not go unnoticed by Allied High Command planning for the final acts of the war in the Pacific, the invasions of Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and ultimately the Japanese home islands in Operation Downfall. Pre-Burma, Allied planners anticipated fierce armored resistance on the beaches of Kyushu and Honshu. Japanese doctrine for homeland defense, Ketsugo, called for the mass commitment of all available armor in decisive counterattacks against the beachheads. It was assumed this would lead to intense, costly armored battles. The after-action reports from Burma fundamentally altered this calculus. Planners now understood that the Japanese tank fleet, even its best models, was technologically obsolete. The presence of even a modest number of Fireflies, or their American equivalent, the 76 Mittermeer-armed Shermans and M36 tank destroyers, could create kill zones on the landing beaches, shattering Japanese armored counter-thrust before they could develop. This intelligence allowed for a more aggressive and confident allocation of forces. The planned deployment for Operation Downfall included hundreds of upgunned tanks and tank destroyers, specifically to replicate the Firefly effect on a massive scale. Captured Japanese documents after the war revealed that their own planners had reached the same grim conclusion. An analysis from the Imperial General Headquarters in early 1945 stated that committing their armored divisions to a direct confrontation on the beaches would be tantamount to suicide, given the enemy's demonstrated standoff capability. Some defensive plans began to shift towards holding armor further inland, for use in ambushes in more broken terrain, a tacit admission that they could not win a direct armored duel. The final tally and enduring legacy. When the guns fell silent in August 1945, the record of the Sherman Firefly in the Burma campaign was nothing short of spectacular. A maximum of 16 Fireflies had, through a combination of sheer firepower and psychological impact, neutralized an entire theater's worth of enemy armor. The confirmed kill-to-loss ratio was astronomically lopsided, exceeding 30 to 1, with 0 Fireflies lost to Japanese tank fire.